Do we have Dr. Piper? Oh, great. All right, bring him on. Let's talk about Dr. Piper. I'm glad you're here. Dr. Everett Piper is the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University and the author of Why I Am a Liberal and Other Conservative Ideas. His new book, which I was reading over the last couple of days, is Not a Daycare: The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. Dr. Piper, it's good of you to come on. I appreciate it. This is a fascinating book, and I think the best way to introduce people to this book is for you to tell the story of how you read it, because I read that story with my mouth hanging open about Corinthians. It's an amazing tale.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Klavan. I'm honored. And briefly, it was about 2 years ago at Oklahoma Wesleyan University, where I serve as president, that we have required chapel on Wednesday and Friday. It was just before Thanksgiving, and the sermon for that particular day was on 1 Corinthians 13. For those who don't remember, it's the quintessential love chapter of the Bible. You've heard it read at 1,000 weddings. Love is patient, love is kind. Well, we actually had a student at my conservative Christian liberal arts institution that came forward and confronted the speaker after this particular homily. And he said, "You offended me. You singled me out. You made me feel uncomfortable. You victimized me." I'm serious.
From the love is kind. What was his what was his problem? What was his problem with?
Well, apparently he felt guilty. He felt that we were wrong for making him feel guilty for not being loving enough. So I had a response. I challenged the young man, and I said, "You know that feeling you had of discomfort during that sermon on love? It's called your conscience. You might want to attend to it." And then I suggested, you know, at Oklahoma Wesleyan University, as any good university should, we're going to challenge you and we're going to confront you. We're not going to coddle you and we're not going to comfort you. We actually expect you to grow up and become a man of character rather than sit around and be selfish and self-absorbed and narcissistic in your sin. So if you feel guilty during a sermon or an altar call, good. Confess what's wrong with you rather than blaming everybody else about what's wrong with them. And I concluded by saying, my land, this is a university, it's not a daycare. And that led to this book and this interview.
Yeah, because the thing went viral. I mean, everybody was passing it around
yes.
because it was, because everybody's so tired of these, they call them snowflakes, but there's one, you tell so many stories about them, but we've all heard the stories. Now, so what is this coming from? I mean, this was starting when I was in school, which is a long time ago, but it's gotten to be, it's gotten to be like a plague. What is causing this?
I would argue it's my industry, it's education. We've created this monster and it's turning around to bite us. For decades, we've been teaching lousy ideas. We've been teaching self-absorption and self-actualization and narcissism. We've been teaching kids that it doesn't matter what you believe as long as it works for you. Richard Weaver wrote a seminal work in 1948 and he titled it Ideas Have Consequences. And what was his point? Ideas have consequences. Ideas matter. They always lead somewhere. And if you teach bad ideas, you get bad culture, bad kids, bad government, bad corporations, and bad community. If you teach good ideas, the big ideas, the first things, you get good culture, good kids, and good community. Like your grandmother said, garbage in and garbage out. The chickens are coming home to roost. We've been teaching terrible ideas for decades, and now we're seeing terrible behavior in our campuses and in our campus green.
There's no getting away from the fact that when you talk about these bad ideas, these are leftist ideas. I mean, these are not the ideas that I hear in campuses. None of them, is from the right. It's all from the left, and it's kind of a narrative on the right that the left made this march through our institutions, that they very purposely took over the academy, took over Hollywood, took over the news business. Do you feel that this was an intentional assault on the academy? Do you feel the left as a movement did this on purpose?
M. Scott Peck called it the diabolical human mind. I have a friend, Dr. Graham Walker, calls it the pathology of the intellect. In the epistle to the Romans, the Apostle Paul calls it the reprobate mind. These are all references basically to this. The smarter you are, the more arrogant you become, and you drink your own Kool-Aid and you believe your own lies. So yes, the academy is at fault. Was it intentional? You could argue whether it is or it isn't, but the fact of the matter is, we've been teaching these ideas, these terrible ideas for decades, and now we're suffering the consequences for it. And what you see today is ideological fascism rather than intellectual freedom. A fasciste was a Roman bundle of sticks bound together so tightly that it couldn't be broken. It's out of that we get the word fascism. And today, if you don't comply, if you don't submit, if you're not one of us, if you don't think like we think and believe like we believe, we're going to crush you, we're going to suppress you, we're going to sequester you, we're going to expel you. You're verboten and you're unwelcome. It's the opposite of intellectual liberty, classical liberalism. It's ideological fascism.
Well, we're talking about this book by Dr. Everett Piper, Not a Daycare, The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. Now, the book, Oklahoma Wesleyan University is a Christian school, and
right.
You talk a lot about Christ and teaching Christianity. And I've argued for a long time that we need a revival at the intellectual top rather than a tent revival. We need one in our academies and in our with our intelligentsia, which I actually believe is happening even as you and I are sitting here talking about it. But not every school is a Christian school. And, you know, there are schools that are great schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. These are terrific schools, or they used to be, that would, in some sense, wouldn't they be betraying their brief to be teaching Christianity as if it were the truth? I mean, is that a problem?
Actually, no. Let me explain why, in my view. And this is the beauty of a liberal arts academy. You and I could debate that. Harvard and I could debate that. But Harvard and Dartmouth and Princeton and Yale and all of the Ivy League institutions, with the exception of one, were founded explicitly in a Judeo-Christian ethic. Harvard, for example, had its original mission statement that said, to lay Christ at the bottom as the foundation of all learning. So I'll use your word, revival. Revival implies that you can revive, return, reform, go back. Go back to what? To a true north, to veritas, Latin for truth, which is still on Oxford's shield some 1,000 years after it was founded. So my question would be this. Do you believe what G.K. Chesterton said when he said you have no freedom without fences? Freedom does not suppose or presuppose a free-for-all. Freedom cannot be had without boundaries. You can't play soccer if you don't understand the rules, if there isn't a referee to blow the whistle. If it all digresses to power and privilege, you can't play the game. So what would you rather have, the French Revolution and the guillotine, or the American Revolution and self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator? I think the proof's in the pudding as to which model and paradigm gives you more intellectual and personal freedom.
Well, I certainly agree with that, the last part of what you just said, and the proof is in the pudding. But the thinkers that led up to the French Revolution, the Enlightenment thinkers, some of the thinkers who came after, who were anti-religion, thinkers like Nietzsche and people like, who basically opposed the entire idea of God. Would you not teach them?
Oh, no, I would teach them robustly. I want my students to understand Nietzsche better than anybody else. I want my students to understand the debate, to engage in it, to have a robust argument, to exchange ideas. It's the beauty of conservative education is we conserve the time-tested truths that are endowed to us by our Creator. It's the beauty of classical liberal education because you believe in liberty and liberation and freedom and justice. And the truth, like Christ said, the truth shall set you free. Not your power or my privilege, not your person, not your pulpit, not your podium, not your priest, not your pastor, not the pedagogue, not the politician. Truth will judge the debate, and it's only within the context of those fences, to go back to Chesterton, that we can truly engage in what the Academy was established to do, and that's pursue liberty and liberation that's grounded in a standard bigger and better than you and me.
Let me challenge this, put forward a challenge. It may not be what I would say personally, but I know it is what people would argue on the other side. We believe, both you and I believe, that certain parts of the truth are just revealed to us. They're not, they're axioms. They're things that, as you say, are self-evident, and as Jefferson said, are self-evident. But there are many people who simply do not accept the Bible as the truth. Are these people going to be excluded? Is the other side of too much tolerance intolerance? Are the people who will not, don't want to live a biblical life, don't want to live according to what they see as basically the fiat of religion, are those people to be excluded from education?
Absolutely not. In fact, I would argue that somebody that disagrees with everything I've said on your program today would have more freedom on my campus than they would at Berkeley, for example. You can come to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and engage in this discussion with me with much greater liberty, liberation, and freedom to disagree with me at my campus than you would have at Berkeley. The proof is there. Milo, for example, whom I disagree with on a lot of things, would enjoy more intellectual freedom here. That does not presuppose or assume that I'll agree with him. And in fact, we may disagree robustly, but we can have that debate. We can have that disagreement. We can exchange ideas in a civil and tolerant fashion without saying, I can't tolerate your intolerance and I hate you hateful people and I'm sure that nothing is sure, and cut off the very branch upon which we sit. We actually believe there's an answer at the end of the day, and the belief in that answer gives us the freedom to pursue it.
All right, a couple more practical questions. One of the things that always puzzles me is why parents of basically conservative bents send their kids to these schools. And I mean, you know, people shell out a lot of money for these schools, as I well know, and you save up your whole life to be able to do it. And sometimes these kids go into debt. Why do the parents keep doing it? And how can you get them to stop?
They're crazy. I mean, it's,
okay,
it's
that's
nonsense.
a simple answer. Yeah.
But stop. Your question is the perfect summary to this interview. What in the world are you doing? You spend 18 years of your life training up your child in the way he should go so that when he is old, he will not depart. And in the first 18 minutes, as you drive away from your campus of choice, they're taking pride in tearing his heart, mind, and soul out. Why would you do that? Why would you pay for that? Parents need to start paying, start voting with their pocketbook and their feet. They need to stop sending their kids off to these institutions that teach this pablum and send them to a school that actually believes that there's a right and wrong answer at the end of the day. I'll close with this. I don't give you a degree in opinions at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. I don't say you majored in an opinion. I actually hope you learned something. Opinions lead to bondage and slavery. Pol Pot had an opinion. Mao had an opinion. Robespierre had an opinion, and it did not end well. Christ said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Which paradigm do you want for your kid? Which one will lead to a freer culture and freer society?
Well, I think a lot of people are going to feel, I think you are, fighting against the tide, but that doesn't mean you can't win. Not a Daycare, The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth by Dr. Everett Piper. Dr. Piper, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Very interesting.
I'm honored. Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot. You know, I have to say, I wrote, it was right after Obama won again. I wrote a piece that's still up on City Journal. You can find it, called The Long Game, in which I said, you know, conservatives typically neglect the culture. And among the things that we have to do is we really have to start arguing for a revival at the intellectual top. I mean, this is the thing. The idea of relativism has played itself out. It makes no sense. The idea of multiculturalism was disproved on September 11th. You know, these things have fallen apart, and we can make the argument, but it's a tough argument to make because I think religion is, you know, obviously religion in the modern world is going to look different than medieval religion. You know, the medieval people didn't know as much as we know. We were talking, Spencer and I were talking before about C.S. Lewis's idea that in the Middle Ages, they saw the sky as the dome of a cathedral, whereas we see it as infinite, meaningless space. But you can't stop seeing it as infinite space. It is infinite space. You can't stop seeing it. You can't continue to believe that the sky is a dome once you've sent a rocket up through it. So we're going to have to make sure that our religion addresses a scientific world instead of, closing our eyes to the things that science has taught us.